feel like Kobe in the fourth quarter.
This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast. We're brought to you by Prize Picks, coming at you Tuesday morning. It's January 14th after the Wolves 120-106 win over the Wizards in Washington last night. We'll try and be a little bit more, I think, recappy with this one, being as I would assume many of you were watching the Vikings playoff game last night over Wolves-Wizards. And so we kind of have the perfect guest to recap it. Chris Hine, Wolves beat writer. He was there on the scene last night in DC. Chris, what was it like there? It did not seem like there's a lot of people.
Oh, it wasn't a lot of people. I will say this road trip's had a couple of those, or this road stretch, I should say. It's had a couple of these arenas where kind of dull life. New Orleans was like this too, kind of dull. Life was very empty. Last night, at least, had a good contingent of Wolves fans and plenty of podcast listeners. I don't think I've ever gotten recognized in an arena, especially a road arena, as I did last night. So shout out to the multiple people who said hello. Thank you guys for your support. Appreciate it. And yeah, so when Ant kind of took over in the fourth quarter, it felt a little bit like as he said, a little bit like a home game, because everything he was doing was getting a reaction from the crowd, and yeah, that was kind of the vibe. It was the crowd, I think, was just waiting for the Wolves to do something, for three quarters, and you're sitting there thinking, is this going to be potentially their worst loss of the season? Even topping that Toronto debacle, right? But the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, like, they just got to play like 3 good minutes and this game is over. And sure enough, they eventually did so, maybe a couple minutes into the fourth quarter, and they were able to cruise to a double-digit lead. But Ant, was the main reason for that, and kind of his shift in mindset in the fourth quarter was what ended up really affecting the game overall.
Yeah, that's the main thing I want, or first thing, and probably main thing I want to focus on. It's another huge night from Ant when we look at the box score at the end of the night. It's 41 points, 7 assists, 6 rebounds. He was 5 of 11 from deep. Also got downhill, shot a lot of 2-point shots. Which he hasn't been doing very much of. He made 9 of his 14 twos as well. I think it was like, when I'm putting this together to send to you last night, I was like, yeah, like, gotta lead with Ant, because that's a really big stat line. But
right.
He was the story of the game because he was like struggling and slow and turning it over a lot in the first half of the game. So part of me is like, well, is he the story? Was he the reason they won? And the answer is yes. It's like, even if he's having a lot of these turnovers and it's an up and down performance over the course of the game, they can't win without these offensive bursts that he provided, which he was amidst some turnovers and missing some shots in the first half, or kind of figuring it out over the course of the game. Like, he would have these little booms, right, where it's like he scores on 4 of 5 possessions and it like gets them an 8-point lead and gets it back from being down 1 or 2. Like, they need him. And I don't know how much you've like thought about this specifically, but this is kind of what I feel like I'm going to remember Ant's 5th season in the NBA as, provided, nothing changes massively in the second half of the season. We just kind of copy paste this on there, where it's like the season where he didn't have a lot of offensive help and they just needed him to be able to win, to be able to solve what that night's sort of puzzle was defensively. And he had to score a lot. Like, that is, which is pretty different than last season. If I would have defined what Ant's year was last year as well, it's just, he is the volume scorer guy, and that's what his role is on this team. It's what they kind of seems like it's what they need him to be.
They need him to play at a all-star, all-NBA level almost every night, it seems like, to win some of these games, right? I think of that Clippers game is probably the best example of that the home game recently. Like, if Ant doesn't play the way he played in that game, do they win that game against the Clippers? And likely not, right? Like
Oh, yeah.
that's just kind of how that game would have gone. Like, so you're right in the sense that last year they didn't really need this. You know, you were maybe getting a little. Obviously, Carl was there, and then when Carl went out, Nas had some stretches. Mike, was having some really good nights here and there. So you didn't need this last year, especially with the way they were playing defense too, and their ability to just hold teams to under 100 points each night. But man, they need him to be able to, like you said, figure out the puzzle each night. And I think that's a good way of putting it. Is it more playmaking? Is it more scoring? How can he score? Because I don't think there's a lot of games where they're going to win if he has a game like he played against Memphis.
Right.
Like again, if he has a game like the Clippers against Memphis, they'd win that Memphis game.
100%.
So you're right in the sense that it is a difference of they need Ant to level up more often, I guess. Maybe not every night, but more often. They need him to level up into superstar territory because this offense just has struggled at times throughout the year. And his night was kind of a microcosm of where they were at turnover wise. It was like, he had 7 turnovers, and they had 13 in the first half. But the fourth quarter, he has just 1 turnover, and they put the game away. So him taking care of the ball, the team taking care of the ball at the same time, and recognizing what the game needs in a given moment, figuring it out in game as teams shift their coverages. This is stuff that he wasn't doing 2-3 years ago, but he's got to do it now. And so if nothing else, it's a learning process, but this is not a team that's built for learning processes. It's a team that's trying to win.
It's like, I've been thinking about like Cade Cunningham some, and, I've seen a couple people like make that comparison of last year. He's not surrounded by a lot of shooting on that Pistons team. And so he would receive a ton of defensive attention, much like Ant has this year, and had to kind of figure out how to play through double teams or extensive coverages in that sort of way. Now, I obviously I wasn't watching every Pistons game or following it all that closely last year, but the Pistons are a bad team, and so it's like I'm sure you could frame that in Detroit as Cade is like figuring it out. Oh, we got a dog.
My friend's got a dog. They have a dog here. He's or she's I don't know what she sees outside. She sees something.
Right. I'll just keep going.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, like, in Detroit, it was like, okay, well, Cade's still figuring out because we're still figuring it out as a team, and so he's learning how to play against this coverage and that coverage, and that's what this season is about. The weird part to me about this Wolves season is that is what this season is turning into being about, is like, how can Ant figure out how to do this and that and solve these different puzzles? But they also have the goal or expectation of being a good team, this season, a team that does have playoff expectations, that did at least come into the season with, thinking they could be a contender in the Western Conference. And that just makes this, I think that framing makes us a little bit more bizarre. It feels like night to night, right? Where it's like, okay, I guess they're, figuring this out, and it's frustrating when it doesn't work against Memphis, but it's also somewhat understandable that he is still needing to figure it out because he is 23 years old. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is it's a little disappointing that he needs to. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think we've seen him. It's year 5, right? We think of it as year 5 in the NBA, and not that he's 23, right? You think of it, year 5, he should have it all figured out by now. He should have seen every coverage, right? He should instinctually.
But it's just like, turn on the game, man. Like, clearly he doesn't. Like, that's just like he doesn't. Like, what it is.
And last night it took him. As he said last night, he realized kind of in the fourth quarter that they weren't doubling him as much. It took him 3 quarters to figure that out, essentially, right?
Yeah, or this is a go game. This is like a go.
This is the chance for me to score. Yeah. And he woke up in the fourth quarter in that sense. But
And then he did. And so now, like, I'm critiquing his 41-point performance. It feels weird. I'm not like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, this is just what I feel like I'm going through.
But you're right. I think fans are probably sitting there thinking, like, why didn't he recognize this like 6 minutes into the first quarter, right? Or whatever, right? You know, or 6 minutes into the second quarter, or at halftime when the coaching staff is talking to him and making adjustments, whatever, right? Like, why did it take 3 quarters? But I keep telling people this. I'm like, this is just how it goes in the NBA with Ant. Like, he is learning all the time. Like, that is just who he is as a player, right? He, you know, he's not like these guys who have played in Europe their whole lives, who develop like this instinctual feel for the game. You know, he is learning. And he's a very good learner and processes things and is very intelligent. But it just takes time. And to get it from the process of getting it from like seeing stuff on film to having it become instinctual to where you can make split-second decisions in a moment in a game when a team throws a certain thing at you, that takes a long time to happen, right? It takes a lot of reps, it takes a lot of film work, it takes a lot of practice, and it takes years in the NBA of just piling up this institutional knowledge. And it's why I tell people all the time when we discuss kind of the arc of Ant's career, I'm like, he's 23. That is still young in NBA years. You know, by the time he gets to 26, 27, right, where some of these other guys are like Luka and Tatum and Jaylen Brown, whoever, right? Some of these guys who are have a few years on Ant, you know, that's what you hope for, that he's finally at that level that people think he should be at now, which is like it all becomes instinctual. That's probably going to happen in 3-4 years, right? But it's still happening now. Is what I try to tell people.
It is happening. It's not his growth of institutional knowledge is not growing as fast in the league as his jump shot did, you know? And I think like, and that's kind of the perfect example to me, because it's like with that jump shot, you can just get into the gym, and if you're as talented as Ant, you can work it as he has to incredible results, and deserves credit for now being one of the best shooters in the NBA, right? Just straight up one of the best shooters in the NBA after coming into the league, needing to learn a lot about shooting. And I think, you know, going forward, the recognition from him will need to be, I need to work on my understanding of the game just as much as I need to work on my practical skill development going forward. Part of that is just because he's well ahead of the curve in terms of skill development in his now 4.5 seasons. And I wouldn't say he's behind the curve in terms of like understanding and learning the game. It's just not going at the same speed. He's had a difficult environment to need to learn in with some of these things. I mean, there isn't a lot of spacing out on the floor. His second or third best teammate has kind of been a revolving door over all 5 years of his career. Like, I think it would be a little bit better had he, or a little bit further along, had he been in the same environment, you know, the whole time. But I don't know. At the end of the day, it's just this weird thing where, you know, after that Memphis game, like, you do, I think, necessarily have to prescribe a lot of blame onto Ant there, but that doesn't mean it's unreasonable. You know, it's not unreasonable that Ant didn't figure out this face guarding coverage that he got from Jalen Wells there was the first time he'd really seen it. So it's really, to me, about, and I think that's what this whole second half of the season is it's like, what did you learn in the first half, and how can you like apply that in the second half to learn faster, to execute faster? What's going to look like on Monday when you play Memphis again, and you know that Jalen Wells kid's going to guard you the same way? Like, how quickly does that flip switch, and then how do you dominate through that?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's learning within season, and we have seen Ant learn within seasons before and figure it out. Last year was the year of they're putting 2 on me. Okay, now I know to do X, Y, and Z. The year before was when Carl was out for 50 games. That was his really first crash course in learning how to read NBA defense. Really 2 years ago is kind of when this whole trajectory that he's on now has taken place, right?
I agree.
If you think about it, it's really been from the time Carl went out, ironically, in Washington 2 years ago, it started Ant becoming the primary guy, the guy with the ball in his hands the most, figuring out defenses and having to break it down on an every night basis. From the moment Carl went out, that is where Ant's career has been.
Yeah,
and
I like that.
And we've been on that plane ever since. See, we didn't even plan that kind of segue out today and talk. We just talked through that. It's like, oh yeah, that happened in Washington. Yeah, right. It all comes full circle. So that's really been what Ant's what his career trajectory has been when you think about it. Ball in his hands, having to read defenses, and to your point about the skill development, you know, in the summer, like he can get in the gym all he wants, and he does, right?
Yeah.
Whether he's in town, whether he's in Miami, whether he's in Atlanta, wherever he is, he's in the gym, he's got his people he's working with. But you can't simulate how NBA teams are going to be defending you. You can shoot all the shots you want. You can work on all the mid-range you want. You can shoot as many threes as you want and do as many of these individual workouts as you want. But 5-on-5 game speed, how teams are going to defend you can't simulate that in the summer, right?
Oh, I think you're absolutely right.
And you know, maybe that's why the Olympics and FIBA in years past were important, because that was simulating that. But obviously he had different roles, like
on those teams,
than or especially last year in the Olympics, than he does with the Timberwolves. But the point being is, you only get this with reps. You know, you only get this kind of stuff with game reps. So again, it's the education of an NBA star is what you're witnessing,
and it's happening
in real time. Yeah,
it is happening, and these are the things that we knew that he was going to have to solve, like at some point in his career once the playoffs came around, right? Like this is actually good in that he's going to have picked up every single which way that he's going to be guarded, and then whatever the playoff series is this year, they'll decide to guard him one way, and he'll be able to go back into his memory and with the coaching staff of like, hey, we want to do this, this, and this, or they're going to switch the coverage. All right, you know how to go into this gear. You face this against Memphis earlier in the season. You face this against Golden State earlier in the year. Like, theoretically, this should be a very good thing in that he's putting things in his bag and remembering them, making it institutional knowledge. And I think sometimes it feels like it isn't becoming that because it takes them 3 quarters to recognize what it is. But it doesn't mean that that recognition isn't there. It's just kind of now about, I think, expediting it. I want to keep talking about Ant, but let me grab our first break here. Today's show is brought to you by Adriana Lonick at Coldwell Banker Realty, and she is a Minnesota and Wisconsin licensed realtor. I know for a lot of people out there, you are thinking about buying that home, or selling your home in 2025. It's something on your to-do list. Maybe it's a New Year's resolution. And, you know, much like any sort of New Year's resolution, you need to put a plan in place to get that ball rolling. And what that would look like with purchasing a home is setting up a free consultation with Adriana. You can do that by going to the dancingrealtor.com. That's the website that's up on the screen. Or you can call or text her at 715-304-9920. When you contact her, you set up a free strategy session, and she can help figure out what it is that you need and where it is that you're wanting to go with your purchasing process. The perk is, for signing up for one of these free strategy sessions with her, you're entered to win some lower level Wolves tickets to a game this season. Adriana is someone we've worked with now for a couple of seasons. We know some of you have bought or sold homes through her. We'd love to make this sort of a mutually beneficial thing all the way around. Just check out what the process looks like by going to thedancingrealtor.com or calling or texting her at 715-304-9920. You'll be entered to win some Wolves tickets and hopefully, you know, get a house or sell a house sometime in the near future. That's Adriana Lonick at Coldwell Banker Realty. Our other sponsor today is Prize Picks, and I was just looking this morning. I mean, we don't need to submit a daily fantasy lineup for next week's football games, but they do already have, I don't know what the second weekend of the NFL playoffs is called. Is that just the divisional, whatever it's called? I don't know what it is.
The divisional round. I know.
Is it the divisional round?
Vikings fans don't have too much familiarity with, the various weekends of.
How'd the Niners do this year, Chris?
Not great, Bob. Not great.
Not great. A few that I have just in here that are that were standing out to me and was Isaiah Pacheco's number seemed low. It was actually even lower than this when I started it. I'm gonna say more than 40.5 rushing yards for him. Obviously, he was hurt for a lot of the season, but I think he's going to be their guy in the backfield. I would see him having more than 40.5 rushing yards. Jared Goff had like the highest passing yardage total. If I was looking for one to go less than, I would say less than 269.5 for him. Both Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson had lower passing yardage numbers. I saw Allen at 237.5 passing yards. I'd say more than that. Again, you can kind of put this together over the course of the week, submit multiple lineups, and have some daily fantasy lineups rolling for the for the divisional playoff round. If you don't have an account, you can make one at PrizePicks.com or the PrizePicks app. You put in the promo code Dane. That helps us, lets them know that you came from me. But also gets you $50 in promo funds in your account when you make your first $5 bet. Keep your eyes peeled on there too. Go into the promotions tab in the upper left there. You can see there's a lot of stuff they have going on. Just on like tonight is Taco Tuesday, so they have discounts. Fridays they have free protected plays, and then through the playoffs they'll have other different random promotions there too. So keep your eyes peeled for those. That's PrizePicks.com, PrizePicks app. To keep going on Ant a little bit, Chris, and this is maybe going from hyper focusing on the Wizards game into branching out a little bit. He was fined again by the league. This time it was for flipping off a ref during the game. It was his fifth fine of the season he's received for the NBA for complaining about the refs or using profanity in post-game media sessions. 5 fines is a lot. That's standing out. You took that upon yourself as an opportunity to ask both Chris Finch and Anthony Edwards about these fines afterwards. How did that go?
Finch just said, it's been addressed organizationally and individually with Ant was kind of the way that he framed it. And Ant said, that was a young, dumb, stupid mistake that he made essentially, and it's one he won't make again. And I think his quote, if I could pull it up here, basically saying like, I have kids watching me and parents are looking at me like, what is he doing? Flipping the bird, flipping birds in the middle of games.
I like how he called it flipping birds.
Flipping birds. Yeah, exactly. It's like flipping birds, like an offshoot of Angry Birds or something like that. Flipping birds in the middle of basketball games, and kids are looking up to me. So, and he seemed very genuine in the way that he talked about it last night. So, and I asked him as kind of a follow up to that. I said, we've seen this from you before in terms of the technical fouls. Like, I feel like last year you piled up the techs early in the season, and then as the season went on, you didn't have as many. And he's like, that's what I'm trying to do this year. He's like, and I said, like, no more technicals. He's like, no more technicals. I'm like, all right. I'm like, okay. We'll see how that goes. Yeah.
I mean,
but I do.
It's on his radar.
In all seriousness, he was very sincere in his apology about flipping birds. Yeah,
flipping birds. Yeah, I mean, so. In the Finch answer to you too, he was just talking about, there's been a season where there's been a lot of frustration, and I think a lot of frustration for Ant, which I think we understand. And then you kind of understand a little bit of like projection of that frustration. I think about the games when he has, complained about the officiating. It was kind of a projection of the frustration he was receiving from the way he was being covered or his shot not, going in. I think about, after that Celtics game when he was frustrated about needing to be a passer rather than a shooter, there's frustration from that. And he complains about it when really it was really working that way to be a passer in that game. But I just think, and this is another example of, 23 years old, not to totally excuse it, but to remind us that he's still very much at that maturity stage. Like, it takes him a little bit of time to process his frustrations and, kind of come to a more practical, like, oh yeah, this is what I actually need to do. And hopefully we do look back at it at the end of the season and like, oh, he's got that a little bit more, he's got his emotions a little bit more in control in the second half of the season. I mean, I don't know. At the end of the day, it's kind of like his money. Like, it's not, I'm not here. I don't think it's making him necessarily like a bad leader or anything like that. I guess it's bad if kids are seeing him flipping birds, but like, you know what I mean? It's not, it's not necessarily a serious problem for anyone other than himself, in that it's just his money. What is he, probably up to like 300 grand now in fines?
Something like that. Yeah. Shooting birds, by the way, not flipping birds.
Oh, shooting birds. Sorry.
That was his,
pew, pew.
That was his, it's like duck hunt or something like that.
Okay. That's what him and Joe Ingles are doing duck hunt on the bench.
Yeah, exactly. To your point though, I think what you see, you kind of notice a cycle sometimes with Ant, right? It's like, in game, and then even sometimes after the game, like the Celtics game when he was talking to us, the frustration of the moment will get to him, right? He wears his emotions on his sleeve, and that sometimes carries over to the post-game interview sessions, right?
Sure.
And then maybe he just has a night of sleep. He gets on Call of Duty, lets out some frustration there, right? Has a night of sleep.
More birds,
right? Comes back the next day, rested, a little removed from the night before, and just sees things a little clear. Like, oh yeah, I got, the double teams. Like, yeah, I got to deal with them better, right? Like, I could easily see a scenario where he's just all worked up in the moment, and then when things calm down, it just, you just see things a little more clear, a little more level-headed, and that's human nature. It makes you human, right?
Well, it's where he's at right now, and I think it would be fair for some people with everything we're saying, not fair, but you would understand them being like, well, we want you to learn this quick, we want to learn this coverage quicker, we want you to control your emotions quicker, we want you to be aware, like, quicker. And some 23-year-olds are like that, but this is just part of the Ant package. He's an incredible shooter. He's an incredible athlete. Like, he's not going to be 10 out of 10 in everything immediately. And I'm mostly saying that to myself, because these are the things that I find myself like annoyed with, like, in my notes, like, all right, another dumb turnover, or another this, or he didn't run back on defense because he was arguing with the refs. And those are true. Like, he needs to do those things better to win more, but they are at the same time a product of his still growing maturity. And again, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's the story of this Ant season to me, is finding success while still finding some of his maturity. Let's move to some other players though from this game. Julius Randle, kind of on a nice little stretch here, other than the end of that Memphis game. He's, rattling together like pretty consistently.
Night.
Yeah, like a lot of those. Again, some bad decision making at the end of the Memphis game in ways cost him there. But last night, 20 and 10 looks springy attacking. He's had, like, when Ant does quiet down a little bit throughout some of these games, which, like we're saying, happens, it is, comes upon Julius to be a little bit more of an offensive threat and an effective isolator. I mean, all of this is in the context of that it did come against the Wizards, but he was good against them. Rudy was good and physically imposing. Bunch of rebounds early, offensive glass, punished in that sort of way. And I thought Nas did as well. And I've been talking a lot recently about, like, I want to see Randle do this against a better team. I want to see Rudy do this when he's guarding a better center. And I think those things still ultimately need to come where they need to play better against the better teams. But this is kind of their path to racking up regular season wins. This has kind of been part of the Rudy thing all along, is like, if you have a plus advantage, Rudy, dominate it. If you have a plus matchup, Julius, dominate it. Nas the same. And again, it's the Wizards, so of course there were plus matchups, but they did that. And when we talk about this team being very, very ant, well, this is the way to make it a little bit less ant and share it around some. When Rudy can punish, when Julius can punish, when Nas can punish, they have to. And this team's winning, I think, is incumbent upon that.
Yeah, I thought, you were making some good points the other day on the show about just kind of the matchups of Rudy and Julius and kind of getting through a season where it's like, okay, you have the Wizards here. Okay, you need Julius and Rudy to take advantage of those matchups. Mm-hmm. Obviously, where the rubber meets the road is going to be in the postseason when teams can match up better against them. And like you said, you use the example of Julius of like Jalen Williams in OKC, like what's going to, ultimately that's not a plus matchup, right? So so what happens then? But in the meantime, on a Monday night in January, you got to have these kind of nights against Washington. And I'll just say, I think the Wolves as a whole, whether it's Rudy, whether it was Julius, Nas, everybody brought it a little bit, just enough last night, right? And that's what you needed. Again, on a Monday night in January, on the road at the Wizards in a half-empty arena, with not a ton of energy coursing through the building in the middle of a busy road stretch, where you might have fallen off. Like the Wizards played the Thunder pretty decently the night before.
No.
Oh no, that's sorry, I don't know what I was thinking of there. Made it not.
I wasn't gonna let that one go.
So what I meant to say was they were gonna come out super motivated.
I get
on Monday because things had not gone their way the previous night.
And I do think that's
talking
true.
about that with Finch for the game last night. It's like, oh well, when that happens, it's like, well, they're gonna come out super amped up and like.
Well, dude, remember that Portland game?
Well, exactly. Right. Portland lost by 50 before, right? And then and then it was just like Portland came out fired up. So I wonder, Finch didn't mention that one specifically, but I do wonder if that was on their mind a little bit going into last night.
Had to be.
And so what happened after the game? I asked a number of the players and Finch, like, 2 years ago, nights like this were a problem for you guys.
Sure.
Last year, you cleaned it up, kind of playing these teams at the bottom of the standings, right? And where are you at this year? And Finch was like, I give us a B.
Okay.
In terms of the approach. Yeah. On a night in, night out basis. And Ant kind of said the same thing. It's like, he's like, we're okay. On nights like this, like we're not as bad as we were 2 years ago, but we're not where we were last year, so it's some honest answers from the guys, where their approach on a night in, night out basis is not quite where they want it to be, but it isn't the disaster that it was 2 years ago.
I know. I like that.
Yeah.
No, I do. And if they're collectively, I think this ties back to maybe particularly Rudy and Julius. If it is going to just be one of those nights that the mentality is understandably just, okay, you're on a road trip, you're playing the Wizards, it's January. Like, if the mentality is just going to be okay, then you as Rudy got to go. And I think this is one thing Rudy's actually great at. He's like, all right, like I am going to set a tone and I am going to establish what I'm good at here right away. And I think if we looked at like first quarters of games the Wolves have played against bad teams in the Rudy Gobert era, Rudy has put up like good numbers. And that's like one thing Rudy's actually really good at is being consistent in, kind of imposing his will. He is the type of all-star player who imposes his will, night to night. And I think between Julius and Rudy, like if they can do that, that's going to avoid them, dropping a game here and there that, that those really have like some energy, like, like if you this would have been, people wouldn't have been feeling good if they would have lost this game tonight. And I think there is, while I do still question like what Randle's able to do in isolation against a playoff opponent or who Rudy's able to guard in the playoffs against a playoff opponent, like those can be separate conversations. Like what do they need to do to be good in the playoffs versus what do they need to do to be the second and third best players on this team on a night-to-night basis. And as I was watching that game last night, I'm like, okay, like maybe Dane, let's like put the like need a positive advantage matchup sort of thing aside and recognize that a big part of their job is getting this team to the playoffs by racking up wins over the course of the season. That's a big part of the reason why you have those guys on your team. They are like the baseball analogy of innings eaters in many ways. And I just think we've seen that a few times with the bigs as a collective group, all three of them kind of impose themselves. I know I put this in one of the outlines last week in a recent game where I'm like, Gobert, Reid, and Randle all together had an impact there. And I think that's like the next wave of this team behind the driving force that is Ant.
Yeah, and that's where the relief for Ant has to come on a given night that sometimes doesn't show up.
Sure.
You know, where it doesn't show up late in the Memphis game, right? Or Karl was here to have big nights, efficient nights a season ago, especially before he got hurt, right? Those were the things that took that sort of pressure off of Ant to not have to score 41 points to beat the Wizards in January. So again, I feel like they did just enough.
Yeah.
Like that was the theme of last night's game. It was Ant had to have one special quarter. The rest of the team had to do just enough. And that's kind of how they got through it. And to your point about the bigs, I think what you're seeing with Julius and Naz, and I think about that related to Cat and just kind of what Cat did last year in the way that he could just have big nights and take the pressure off of Ant. It just feels like because Karl is kind of an all NBA player before, those nights maybe came a little more frequently for Cat, right?
I think so. Oh yeah.
You know, just percentage wise, those kind of nights, they just don't come as frequently for Julius and for Naz to be able to really take the load off of Ant scoring wise, at least maybe a little more frequently than Cat was able to. If you get what I'm saying.
And so then the question I would be off of that. I agree with this, but it's like, okay, well, what if you gave Julius the bandwidth that you gave Cat last year?
That's
Would
true
you be able
too.
to do it
Yes.
more?
Yeah.
What if you gave Naz more bandwidth? There's always something I'm curious with Naz. Like, can
well,
there
that's
be like
the question,
right?
Naz,
Like,
right?
what
if Naz was playing 33 minutes a night? Yeah. What would it look like?
And I don't know. I mean, I don't know. They don't get the Cat bandwidth, and they're probably not going to, in part because Ant takes more bandwidth this year. And like there isn't as much. If Karl was on this team this season and Ant was still becoming the higher usage player that he is, like Karl would probably have fewer of these games that on this team that you're talking about.
Yeah,
right
that's
here.
true.
You know, that's
but I mean, Karl had to, ultimately Karl sacrificed like that. His numbers were down last year, and obviously we see what happens when he's more of a focal point of an offense this year. And that's why I think, the All-Star recognition meant so much to him, because he was sacrificing. Right. And it was a recognition of that. I also think I've been thinking about this with Julius too, and tell me if you think this is far-fetched or if I'm onto something here. We've heard, obviously people have thoughts about Julius's game, how it looks aesthetically, right? I think people think of the long possessions where he's dribbling and backing somebody down and there's not a lot of movement around, right? We think of that and as kind of the bad side. The aesthetic that comes up when you think of Julius Randle. And I've been but just listening to like Finch talk, to listen to Julius talk about how much he's trying to change his game and adapt his game and what the Wolves are asking him to do. And I'm like, well, maybe the Wolves are asking him to not play like this as much. And maybe that's the change, right? Maybe they recognize that who Julius was in New York just isn't going to fit here in Minnesota. So this whole first half of the season has been about getting Julius to, within his skill set, try to play a more team friendly, acceptable, aesthetically pleasing brand of basketball. But again, it's not a change that happens overnight, right? It takes adjustment, it takes buy-in, it takes all these things, right? And it takes willingness from teammates to be patient with him.
See,
right?
that's the thing too, is like Julius can be molding himself in a different way, which I do think, from the Finch comment.
I think that's happening, or he's trying to do that.
Yeah, and I don't think it's been a quick morphing, but I think there have definitely been like slow little like adjusting of the clay, of what it looks like. But you said it's about his teammates too, and it's about fitting in then to the other two best players on your team, which are Ant and Rudy Gobert, which are two particularly difficult guys to kind of fit in around. Like, as we're talking about with Ant, the way he's being covered and the what he like takes up, it's a little bit. I mean, in a way,
by the way, I think we should clarify fit in from a basketball standpoint, not necessarily a locker room standpoint.
And that's where I'm going. And like the way that Ant's covered, Julius needs to fit in from a basketball standpoint around him differently than he needed to fit in around teammates in New York, I think. And then Rudy, and I know he had Jalen Brunson there, and I know he had Mitchell Robinson in New York, who plays like Rudy too, but like they are both like the high usage guard and the non-spacing big is a tricky one to kind of fit in next to. I think that you're totally right and fair that for Julius, and could fans have complaints about, oh well, it has been 40 games, Chris, it should be coming faster. And you're not arguing that. You're just saying, I think the adjustments are coming. And with a player like Julius Randle, I think a lot of people thought, circle back 4 months or whatever, would be like, well, he's not going to adjust his game at all. And your point is, and Finch's repeated point to us, is that is happening, even if you're not seeing it to the degree that, you think you're seeing it.
Yeah, I think, and I'm guilty of this too. Sometimes you go into evaluating him just looking for the bad stuff and being like, see, look, told you, right? Sure. And I think that is not fair to him and the adjustments that he's trying to make on this team. And I think that's what you're seeing play out. With him right now, and I've thought a lot about that recently. Where and just like with Ant, not always going to be perfect in reading coverages on a given. Like Julius isn't going to have, it's just not going to suddenly click into place and everything is fine moving forward. Right? It's just gradually. And
I really like that.
Can you have more of those games like last night and like against Orlando? And even New Orleans, can you have those games more often than not? Yeah. And that's where you're kind of at with him right now. No, in terms of his playmaking and all of it.
I like that. Me and Britt are going to do an episode tomorrow, because it'll be like 40 games into the season. And I'm going to like do like the thing where I look at the first 20 games and then the second 20 games of the season. And I'm curious to see with Randle, to kind of prove this point, like what has gotten better in chapter 2 of the season, and what ways do signal that he's fitting in more cleanly to this group this year. I'm curious to take a look at that. The one other thing I wanted to get to, though, from this game last night specifically, is the turnover problems. And my question for you, and maybe this ties into everything we've been talking about, from Julius to Ant to Rudy at the beginning, they're 23rd in the league in turnover rate right now. Do you think that these turnover problems are solvable? Can we reasonably expect them to improve? I'm because some teams just don't, right, Chris? Like some teams are, but even some teams that have winning records, like the Clippers and Grizzlies, have turned it over more than the Wolves do right now. They have better records than them. It does feel like for the Wolves to reach something closer to approximating their ceiling, it really has to happen, because they're more of a defensive team than they are an offensive team, whatever. But this is a pretty chronic issue that they have. They turned it over 18 times against the Wizards last night. It's something you feel on a night-to-night basis. Do you think that this gets noticeably better in the second half of the season?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really don't. I think
because it doesn't feel like they're close right now. It's not like one or two small adjustments, right? Like,
I mean that. So this was the main topic that Finch touched on last night was cleaning up the turnovers, and we've heard him say of variations of this before, but there's a certain level of turnovers that you have to live with, especially if you are trying to build an offense predicated on ball movement, right?
yeah,
You're just going to have to live with a certain level of turnovers. And 12 has always been the number that Finch has used as like the acceptable amount, right? He's always said like, well, we need to just clean up the stupid ones, essentially, right? Just the ones that are preventable. And that's basically what he said last night. And it was, he's like, basically we've gone to every guy and said, how can you limit the preventable, not stupid's not the word he used, by the way, the preventable turnovers, right? How can we stamp those out, right? Because if you do that, then you're getting closer to that 12 a game goal, right?
Because
so that's where they're at. That's where their mentality is at right now as a team, primarily focusing on how they can limit the preventable turnovers, the silly ones that happen in the course of a game, the ones where you make a bad decision. I think, last night I remember like there was one turnover off of an inbounds pass. Like Conley and Nikhil got kind of their wires crossed.
Layup the other way.
And there was a layup the other way, and there were a couple others, an 8-second call that Ant got last night as well. Like some of these things, right? You knock a few of those off and you're down to 12, but I just don't know if this team is going to be able to do that on a consistent basis. I'm not sold that they're there. So it's more of a show me kind of thing before I believe you'll actually do it.
And because we're in this moment on January 14th are going off of this game against the Wizards where they just turned it over 18 times. The starters, just the starters, turned it over 15. Ant had 7. Dante had 3. Julius had 3. Jaden had 2. Like, how could we have a lot of confidence in their ability to control the ball? We think about that Memphis game and that turnover Nas had at the end of the half, that just led to if that was a 3 or a bucket at the end of the half to the Grizzlies that could have just been avoided if it wasn't just a silly inbound pass there, right? Like, and these things matter. Like every turnover in the aggregate equals like 1.5 points. It just does. Like that is the 1.4 or something.
Right.
Like that is just the math of that. So bringing that down is something that this team just absolutely has to do. It just does. It's another reason why the personnel of the roster feels like a wonky fit in the offensive scheme that is the free-flowing offense that relies on quick decision making, reading the floor quickly, making smart, fast passes. Like I see that in a lot of the players' like in their games. But I also see a lot of lapses of them not playing that way. And it makes me when these games, like, I don't know, like the Memphis game, they ran a ton of actions. It was more, more scripted. And I know we're talking about some of the Nas turnovers, but it did feel like fewer of the silly ones until it was the end of the game when Julius was just isolating or whatever. But like over the course of the game, when there's a little bit more play call set, we know we're going here, then we're going there. That seems to me to remove a little bit of the silly ones. And I think that's a long way of saying the process, I think, of improving this is in part on Finch, too, of just being like, maybe not giving them the full bandwidth to just go, because if you just let them kind of go, the more freely you let them go, the more they're going to turn it over, right? I think that's just what we know about this group right now. And it's just something that needs to turn around for them.
It's another eternal battle that we've discussed for years: the free flow versus structure, and where's the line? Where's what are the trade-offs? What does the team need at a given moment? And we know Finch would prefer the free flow all the time because it's the most unpredictable. But with this team, I think you're right. I think they're in a moment, and he's in a moment right now where there needs to be more play calling and more structure to do stuff like that, to get things rolling.
And just some less isolation.
Less isolation ball. Yeah, get everybody moving, get the ball moving. Even if it's just like a token sort of thing that teams will know it's coming. They can scout it, they can defend all these all these calls, all these actions, but if it gets them into something or gets them moving, gets the juices flowing on a possession, it's what they have to do.
I'm with you. Last thing, you're in DC right now and living this kind of wild travel month.
Very nomad life I'm living right now. Yeah.
Chris has not been home since last time he did an episode on here. There's a difficulty to the travel of the Wolves January, and just kind of the dog days of the season in many ways, but they need to be winning games through this if they want to be out of the play-in and actually in the playoffs this year. I do think too, it's not just travel. It's just a difficult stretch here coming up, man. Even if we ignore that it's the Cavs on a back-to-back after the Knicks.
Yeah.
It's Warriors, Knicks, Cavs, Grizzlies, Mavs, Nuggets for the next 6. And then it's, Hawks, Suns, Jazz to close the month. Like those are the 9 games. There's no more Wizards on. I mean, the Jazz, I guess, at the very end of the month, but these, these are all 8 of those teams, are gonna beat you if you don't deliver if you don't show up there. This is something that just the nature of the Wolves, maybe being in the middle of the country, just right. I mean, you would know this better than me. Kind of feels like a stretch that they get in sort of every January, maybe early February. It gets a little bit funky. What are you thinking about the importance of this stretch ahead, and what are the keys to sort of survive?
This is it. Like this could be a very pivotal moment in the season because of the quality of opponent, because of the miles that they're logging. In my newsletter promo, in my newsletter today, I'm kind of talking about the travel and how I personally feel on the beats travel wise. And how whenever I see people online kind of complain about, well, they travel in charter jets and they stay in all these fancy hotels. And I'm like, yeah, but still, like this stuff takes a toll on you, especially when you have to be at peak mental and physical performance every other night or on consecutive nights, in a back-to-back situation. That takes a toll on you. I don't care how comfortable the plane seat is, right? It still takes a toll. So last night, before the game, Finch gave kind of the standard answer about, we don't use the schedule as an excuse and this and that, and everybody goes through it, X, Y, Z, You
say bunker mentality?
Yeah, he didn't say bunker mentality.
That's normally a go-to there.
No need to drink. No need to drink from bunker mentality. So he kind of gave the standard answer about, it's a bit of a tough stretch, but schedule does this to everybody, blah, 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 blah. Which is true. And then last night, I think this was when I asked him about kind of the preparation question on a nightly basis for teams like the Wizards, bottom of the standings. He kind of delved into what I would say is probably one of the most honest and candid answers I've ever heard him or really anybody give in 7 years of covering the NBA.
Let's go.
About the night-to-night mentality and energy that you need to have. So here's the quote. In an 82-game season, it's really hard to have 82 must-win games. The league's not really built for that mentally, and a lot of teams are going through it right now. I think you see a lot of fatigue. A lot of players, a lot of coaches are a little bit fatigued by that mentality. Not sure it's overall good for the brain health, but these guys have been doing a good job of trying to get ready to go every night.
That's real.
Right? It's real.
Real.
It's a real answer. Yeah.
It makes sense, and it's because they are normal and real people and needing to live this and live the travel of it and deal with the expectations that come with this season, which make it so if you lose a game to the Wizards, the public perception is going to be disaster. Like
Right.
that it would be, and it would be, and I know like public perception like isn't everything. It doesn't matter all what we're saying in the media or but like
Right.
enough of that when it comes with the weight of the trade that happened this season, and it starts to, not meeting expectations starts to like that gets put on people. It's got put on
Mhm.
Finch a lot this season. I think fairly some and not fairly in other ways. It's got put on Ant a lot, of like, hey, you need to be the leader of this team. You need to be locked in. Rudy, his Q score has dropped this year. It is important to stay focused and stay winning so as to avoid some of that negative juju, right? Of the season, which the players all did kind of cop to, like saying that they heard. And Dante said many times last month, he's like, look, we get it. When we lose, it's going to be a big deal because of the trade. And every time that happens, it's going to point to the trade and it's going to be
Right.
a big deal. Right. And that is a baggage that this team carries this season. But at the same time, like, I think that's true. And that's just, they do carry that baggage, but it is real that it is hard for them to play 82 must-win games. I love that line.
Yeah.
It is. That's
It's
I
a
get that
very
because the
real
other
quote.
teams aren't doing that. Like who's doing that? I mean, I guess the Cavs are and the Thunder are doing it this year, but like lower the bar. Take a look at some of like Milwaukee's losses this season, right?
Yeah.
Dallas is, a lot of, frankly, the teams who are in the Wolves tier or maybe even a tier above the Wolves right now. Like, I don't know. It is hard to stay locked in and to win through difficult travel and schedules and all that. But for the Wolves to win their high expectations that they laid out this season, they do need to be great through it. Like you do need to, they need to be able to survive it. So.
Right. You can't lose these kind of games. You have to, you're in a place where you have to win them and to stay, on a par with like Dallas and Denver and all these teams that are just a smidge ahead of the Wolves in the standings right now, where it's like if the Wolves can put together 2 really good weeks, they could really make some hay in the standings, perhaps,
Yeah.
It's because they're not far out of like the 5 or 4 or it's there for them, if they could just kind of put it together for a stretch of time. And there's no better time than to do it right now. And I think I put in the newsletter this week too, like there might be a clunker in this stretch. There might be a game where they just don't have it. And I said, if I had to guess, my money is on
Cleveland.
that back-to-back Cleveland game after the Knicks, back-to-back at home. Like if they come out just dead in that game and lose by 30, it's going to be sky is falling for the fan base. But in the back of my mind, I'm going to be thinking, yeah, they were set up for this one.
Mm-hmm.
This one was coming a mile away if they lay a stink bomb in that game, right? So I just think you have to mentally prepare and realize that it is a long season, guys. Like there's gonna be some nights like that. It's just mitigating them and not having them as often and finding
and
ways,
how do you respond to them?
Right? And how do you respond to them and just gutting out wins on nights when you don't have it? I think Washington was kind of an example of 3 quarters it didn't look good, and Washington had the lead for moments of that third quarter, but they gutted it out in the fourth quarter and found a way to get a double-digit win. And I think there is something to a win is a win is a win in an 82-game season, and sometimes you're not always going for the style points. Just get a win and move on.
I think that's true, and this stretch is tough. I mean, it's an 8:30 tip against the Warriors on Wednesday, and then it's going to New York, to play at MSG on Friday. So they fly there on Thursday morning, whatever, and then on Saturday morning on Friday night they'll fly back from New York to Minneapolis.
Yep.
I would assume, for sure, to play the Cavs there. Then the next day. So
then a Monday afternoon start in Memphis.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is so if you if you flop against the Cavs because they're really good and because it is a bad back-to-back on a rough travel week, then what are you going to show me on Monday against Memphis? When you're on national TV, you're playing that Memphis team that we saw that you can compete with because they can do a pretty good job on Ja. Like they know the script of like how to stay with Memphis and take care of them. Like then on Monday, are you gonna box out? You're gonna get defensive rebounds against the Grizzlies and not give up 21 of those, again? Are you going to be locked in and beat that team that I know that they internally believe that they're better than? Like those are the things. And so to me, it's like it's approaching it individually, but it's also taking it in the aggregate and understanding you're going to have what you would, like you said, fail in one of these games here. But that's what was special about them last year, right, man? It wasn't like it wasn't extended losing streaks. It was quick, like flush it.
They did have, this was the time of year when they had their roughest stretch of the season. Like, do you remember they had a really bad game against New Orleans at home? Once upon it, like New Orleans blew them out in late December at home, and the sky was falling then too, right? But that was in the middle of a very busy travel stretch, right? And they regrouped and they got it back together. Their defense fell off during that time. That was the one point in the season where their defense had a little slippage. And when they were traveling all around the country, because they had like a weird Christmas trip where they were in Sacramento on like the 23rd. They flew back on the 24th. They went to Oklahoma City. Then they had like Orlando. So they were like on both coasts in the matter of like a week and a half. And it was just a very weird the Boston game where they had to fly the day of because of the weather in Orlando the night before. So they had this stretch last year and it did affect them. It did.
I remember that.
It affected their quality of play because of the travel. And, when you play defense like they did last year and like they do on a nightly basis here, which requires a lot of attention to detail, it requires an amount of physical activity.
You got to play like Nikhil.
Exactly.
And I think we could all imagine that would probably be pretty hard,
exactly, on a night in, night out basis. So that's what you have to watch out for, and that's where the slippage may show. And to bring it all full circle, that's why Anthony Edwards needs to be special on a night in, night out basis, because when he is special, it gives them a chance to win these games. And if he's not, then they might be in trouble.
But that goes to the second thing we talked about too. All right, like Ant's flat here for a quarter or whatever. Okay, Gobert, Randle, Reid. Like, can you pick some of this up? And that's I think that's something that would make sense. As this team does get to better know each other and come together. Of like, all right, we know where we need to fill in for each other. I know where Ant is low, where Rudy is low. Like, and some better recognition of that. I think actually just like Dante in the starting lineup has highlighted more of that energy that they do have. And again, I think even last night again against the Wizards, they showed some of that. But that's what it's going to take. Like, that's what it's going to take. If this team wants to get to like 46 and 36 by the end of the season, or even higher than that, and have a gap between their wins and losses, it's going to be found through consistency. And I think they're only going to win a first round playoff series if they're able to get high 40s wins and get a decent matchup there. So yeah, the work continues now. I was going to say starts now, but continues now. You want to let people know where they can get that newsletter?
Yeah, I'll tweet out a link to sign up. It is free, no subscription required. So if you just want some free Wolves content to your inbox every Tuesday, we have a number of things that go on in it. I do basically the version of a story to kick it off. We do some key stats, some mailbag questions, and then I do the tales from the beat as well. And people seem to like it so far. Yeah. So that's been good.
It is very much, we talk like, when Jace comes on sometimes about his Conley corner thing that Jace does. That's something like unique that Jace does and you don't, and John doesn't do. And this is something that Chris does that John doesn't do and Jace doesn't do. And I think Wolves fans are largely lucky to have all three of you guys on the beat as writers and doing your own thing in all of your own different ways. But this is a cool added one from Chris this year. Obviously, we've been telling you about this the last few weeks, but it's free. Shows up in your inbox, a little email from Chris. I'm like, oh, Chris emailed me.
Yeah, I didn't personally email you. Don't worry.
It looks like it though. It looks like it.
It does. Yes.
I'm like, why didn't you text me, dude? But yeah, I really would recommend that. Appreciate you making it work on a Tuesday morning in Washington D.C. and me and you will connect and figure out what our schedules are for your travel schedule for next week, so we can get you back on. He's Chris Hine. You can follow him on Twitter at Christopher Hine. Check out that newsletter. Sign up for that at thestartribune.com, where you can also find all of Chris's writing. Next up on the show, Britt and I, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, on Wednesday afternoon, I know there's a game tomorrow, but we're going to kind of take stock of where the Wolves are 40 games into the season. It'll be 39. They'll be playing their 40th game on Wednesday night. But that'll be our plan on Wednesday. And then I am getting on the road with Chris, and I will see you in New York on Thursday. Thanks for doing it, man.
Yep, no problem.
Until Wednesday afternoon with Britt. He's Chris. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hard so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.